Well, if I'm really honest, I can't say that I could easily roll off the names of female trombone players, and even less so, ones who are as diverse as my guest today. Carol Jarvis is an extraordinary lady who not only is one of our finest and most versatile instrumentalists, but she's collaborated with a whole raft of household names such as Seal, Taylor Swift, Bon Jovi, Amy Winehouse, Queen, Sting, Ellie Goulding, and many, many more. But not only as a trombonist, but as a keyboardist, vocalist, arranger, and much more. Well, Carol is indeed an incredible inspiration, and she's realised how important it is to cultivate the versatility often required in the rather fragile world of music. And indeed, this has been highlighted for many of us during the recent and ongoing global COVID pandemic. And she's certainly a great example of cultivating the art of creating your own opportunities, or perhaps the art of saying yes to whatever comes along and then worry about how you're going to do it. Well, under normal circumstances, Carol's career to date is utterly amazing. But to think that for 9 years she had to navigate through life-changing medical challenges, including a bone marrow transplant, whilst in the thick of tours and projects, is testament to the strength of her character. Now, many of us would have stopped right in our tracks, but not Carol. She was determined to be right at the forefront of cutting-edge medical advancements and treatments. So I think you get an idea of the sheer feistiness of my guest today. Carol, you really are an inspiration.
No.
I'm looking at you right now, and looking at the kind of space that you're in. It looks like a recording studio. You've got your trombone on one side and all sorts of bits and pieces, and you're looking the picture of health and all of that, thank goodness. And so how has it been for you during this past year and recent months?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute honour. To be honest, I think the pandemic. It might be really strange to ask a freelance musician how it's been, and expect them to say they've been busier than ever. But actually, I have been busier than ever. I think I had this little recording studio built maybe 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago, at the back of my garden. It's sort of about 5 foot, 5 meters by 2 meters long. So it's only a small little space, but I got it all soundproofed. And I'm so glad I did that. Since the pandemic hit, I've spent all of my time in here, not just online teaching. I teach at two conservatoires in the UK. So all of that's been online, but also I do a lot of voiceover work and recording trombone for sort of media composers, library music, TV adverts, all sorts of things. It's just got extremely busy because obviously studios closed, and I've just been, yeah, just so busy.
And it's interesting that, and perhaps we could go back to the early years and what your musical landscape was. So, I mean, was it county music or the family environment that ignited your interest in music?
It was Milton Keynes Music Service to begin with, and then Buckinghamshire County Orchestra and Brass Band. And the music service when I was growing up was absolutely incredible. I remember I gained a Buckinghamshire County Music Scholarship. I was probably about 10 years old, and I was learning trombone and then piano. And the music service, we had the Saturday mornings, which started at about 8 a.m. with musicianship, composing classes, and all the sort of technology side of things, right the way through to orchestras. Every rehearsal you can think of finished at about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That was my Saturdays, and then Monday nights were choir, Tuesday nights were brass band, Wednesday nights were one of the orchestras, Thursday nights was the other orchestra, Friday night was brass quintet, and then all the Saturday morning. So Sunday was my day off, and I actually I don't know how I fit in my schoolwork at all, but that was where my life was. It was always going to be there, music. And I'm just so grateful for, well, not just my parents for being the taxi drivers and funding so much of it, but also to the music service that was around. Because I know since all the sort of art cuts and things, those kind of things, those opportunities aren't around for people these days, which is just so unfortunate.
Absolutely. And it's interesting the diversity of performing opportunities, that you've listed there. But you said, well, you started with trombone and piano, but, trombone for a young girl perhaps was a little unusual or not?
Yes, absolutely. I'm still very much in the minority. Um, but yeah, I managed started on recorder aged 4 and then had a go at clarinet, classical guitar. But then aged 11, I think it was, I passed a music test at school and they said that I could distinguish what was higher and lower. And they said, right, you can choose any instrument, but we need an oboe player in the orchestra. So I
Ah,
went home and asked my parents, what's an oboe? They played me some recordings, and apparently I just said no, that's not for me.
that's funny.
And apparently I just asked my dad, what's the instrument with the slidey arm thing? And he
Wow.
said, oh, it's a trombone. Played me some recordings, and that was it. I was hooked. So
Ah,
that's it.
that's interesting. So, I mean, what was it about those recordings? Was it the actual sound, the musicality, the type of music? What inspired you about those recordings?
I think it was absolutely all of that, and the versatility of the trombone. And luckily, throughout the Milton Keynes Music Service, I was playing in orchestras, brass bands, big bands, improvisation classes, everything right from the very start. So it was the wide crossing all the genres of all the music. I think I heard George Chisholm playing some very comedy pieces of music, right the way through to really soft, beautiful ballads by the likes of sort of Glenn Miller, Dick Nash, and then right the way through to the brass band sound that was really brilliant. And then the big symphonies with the brass section at the back. So, and the trombone is probably one of the most versatile instruments there is. And I'm just so thankful that wherever I'd seen this slidey arm thing, that I
Mm.
was hooked, absolutely hooked from the start.
And it's funny when you think about an instrument because especially with something like a trombone, because you immediately think, oh, an orchestra, and you almost immediately pigeonhole it as being a classical type of instrument, possibly seen in a brass band and so on. But you're absolutely right. When you really, really think about all of the musical genres that it's so prominent in, whether as part of an ensemble or indeed as a solo instrument. I mean, some of the great jazz players on trombone are absolutely amazing, And then now with contemporary music, we've had people like Christian Lindberg, who has helped to elevate the whole trombone experience, in just such magical ways. So it is very interesting what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many inspirational players out there that I've sort of learnt from, been inspired by. Christian Lindberg absolutely being one of them. He was probably brought the trombone to the front of the stage properly for the first time and commissioned so many concertos for the trombone, and then playing things like Vivaldi
Yeah.
on the trombone and showing the versatility and the kind of technical expertise that you can actually get on the instrument,
Mm,
and really advanced the way all trombonists then had to
mm,
step up to the mark, really, because the kind of things you can play on the trombone, even though with the slide it's much more technically difficult than having sort of valves or fingerings and things like that. Um, so it's very very intricate, the fact that, yeah, I mean, it's, you can play everything from glissandos to every note in between, so things like, I don't know, quarter tones or something like that is much easier on the trombone because we've got the slide, but obviously the dexterity that's needed for the faster passages, yeah, is pretty difficult.
yeah, and I'd like to explore a little bit of that maybe later on. But from the county music landscape, which was so varied and stimulating for you, you then went on to the Royal Northern College of Music to become a full-time student there. And did you feel that that was a real extension to your experiences, you know, from the Milton Keynes county music situation? You know, was that diversity explored even more?
Yeah, absolutely. I got offered places at all of the conservatoires around the country, and I just wanted to choose one that would carry on with all the avenues that I was already doing. Um, so I loved the big band playing. I loved orchestral things. I loved brass bands. I loved everything, and I couldn't choose. So I just wanted to carry on doing all of it. And I was split decision between the Guildhall and Royal Northern, but I chose the Royal Northern. I just really loved the atmosphere when I went there on an open day. And now being a professor there as well of trombone, then it's really lovely to be able to see the way the RNCM has grown as well in recent years. And I think that the kind of courses they provide now are unbelievable. And I wish that I'd had even that much scope when I was there. But when I was there, I mean, I still got composition, piano, brass bands, big bands, orchestras. I still carried on with everything. So I was just so thankful for that. And then as I graduated, it was kind of wanting my career to decide which way I was going to go, but
Hmm.
um, still sort of deciding.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because sometimes you can be in an establishment whereby everybody is studying the same subject, i.e., music, but it's a fairly high percentage of music students actually don't know what they want to do, you know, within the music umbrella. And I think with you, what I find so interesting is that you made that effort to be part of so many strands of music. And I think we've definitely seen during this past year that, you know, musicians have to cultivate a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, and perhaps not just be hostage to only playing their instrument. And the fact that you obviously none of us knew COVID was you know on the horizon, you know, when we were students, but nevertheless, the fact is that you know you really embraced all of these things and made those things a major part of your experience as a musician.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've always had a very sort of creative imagination anyway, and always wanted to have lots of projects on the go. I don't really know why. That's just part of me. So I think I've been very, very thankful and lucky when the pandemic came along, because I've always had loads and loads of things on the go. Um, I got into remote recording work probably about 15 years ago now. So, and slowly, gradually built up a bit of a studio for myself, um, and got a name for myself doing all those kind of things. And actually, since the pandemic, I've probably had 150, 200 people contact me asking, what do I need to get? I need to get a microphone. What else do I need? Help.
Yeah.
I've even had Ian Bousfield contact me. Used to be Vienna Philharmonic, and it's
Yeah.
just one of the most prominent trombone soloists in the world. He said, Carol, what microphone do we need to get? What do we need to get?
Yeah.
So I'm just really thankful that I've got known for that over the years. And then I was ready for a pandemic.
Yeah.
Not that we knew that one was going to come along, but also I think versatility is something that I'm always giving lectures about, um, presentations about at various conservatoires up and down the country. Um, and being versatile has enabled me to keep my living going, um, through illness, through pandemics, through all sorts of things. And I mean, even you just have to look at West End shows and the Broadway ads of like a saxophone player. Saxophone players often double on flute, clarinet, all the saxophones, bass
Mm.
clarinet, bass flute, but also they're having to double now on double reed instruments. Saxophone players are learning the bassoon and the oboe, which is
Wow,
completely different
interesting.
again, because that's what's happening in Broadway. So
Mm.
learning the doubling instruments and as many instruments as you can, to as high a standard as you can, is obviously going to open avenues to you. I mean, I've been asked to fix a few musicians for tours, recording sessions. One time we had to find a saxophone player that played the violin.
Oh
Completely
goodness.
different. On
Yes.
tour with Seal, the four-piece horn section, one lead trumpet, me on trombone, and then the two saxophone players, but one saxophone player had to also play the trumpet. So completely different techniques and everything. And there was only one person
Absolutely.
in the whole UK that I knew. So obviously she got the gig. So I'm always encouraging students, if you've always wanted to play another instrument, just find it, get one, get some
Mm,
lessons on it, and just try and take it up, even if it's a hobby.
mm.
I mean, just keeping up piano skills and keyboard skills has enabled me to. I stayed on tour with Seal longer than all the horn section did, because they were cutting the band and changing the type of music. So I ended up being one of the major keyboard players on the tour, and then singing backing vocals as well, which which is another story completely.
It's really interesting, and I suspect though that you know the courses that the music establishments offer moving forward, you know, as we navigate through this pandemic. I mean, surely this is going to change yet again, so that it's not only down to the individual. You know, I mean, some people are maybe not going to be as motivated as you, or some people feel that it's just enough to try and navigate through their own instrument, one instrument, you know, and so maybe this kind of openness is perhaps suitable for a particular type of personality.
Yeah, yes, I agree. And I also think it enables more avenues, more doors to be open to you as well. I mean, I was offered a full-time orchestral job um, back in 2009, but I chose to turn it down, which is probably I thought it was quite scary, quite dangerous at the time, but I'm thankful that I've continued to carry on all avenues of playing in every genre, um, and making a living from that and being my own boss. And
Mm.
surely there's nothing better than that. So I feel
Mm,
very lucky.
absolutely, and it is you know that feeling in a fairly you know fragile industry to be your own boss is you know quite a step really because
Yeah, absolutely.
you don't quite know what's going to happen, you know, from day to day, but nevertheless. But getting back to the trombone, because you know I'm seeing your very lovely trombone by your side there. You know, is there such a thing? I mean, could you tell if it's a woman playing the trombone or a man playing the trombone?
Just from an audio.
Yes.
I think the only thing that usually gives it away is the way they breathe.
Ah,
And
okay.
and quite often a female, quite often, it's not all the time, but quite often the female breath in is a lot higher
Ah, of course. Yes,
than
yes.
the high and low pitch of the breathing in. Sometimes it can sound a bit, rather than,
Mm,
I don't know, there's sometimes that's the only thing that gives it away, but again, it's not always.
mm,
But that could also mean that they're not breathing correctly as well, because breathing right from below is very, very important, for, well, sustaining the kind of long passages and the kind of air that's needed to fill the instrument. So the breath has got to be very, very deep. But that is normally the only thing that you could tell.
yeah. I mean, one of the things, I mean, I've had the wonderful pleasure of working with Christian Lindberg, and I mean, there are many things that amazed me with him and his playing, and what I found was this ability to create such a seamless line, you know, a melody that you think is being played by a musical saw or something. You know, you can't quite detect where the breath is and the control of that breath. And of course, all musicians have to breathe, and we sometimes forget to breathe, you know, when we're not actually, for those of us who are not actually attached to an instrument such as percussion. And sometimes you end up, you know, playing for ages and ages, and you suddenly think, oh, I better breathe now, you know. But of course, for a brass player, it's pretty essential to, you know, to have that under control. But have you found that the art of breathing for you as a trombonist, as a musician, has been important to tap into and control in other aspects of your life?
Oh, very good question. Yes. I mean, first of all, I go back to that sort of what you said about Christian Limburg and the music and the breathing. This when I'm teaching, there's often times when, for instance, students are playing through a crescendo in a phrase to a big climax, but it's such a long phrase that they've got to breathe in the middle, and it's kind of a shame that we've got to breathe to be able to get that long phrase going. And often I'm saying, right, you've got to keep the crescendo going through where you breathe.
Mm,
And to try and describe that is quite often that we finish notes nicely, so that sort of the end of a phrase, you've got to finish each note nicely, sort of a nice rounded ending. But in the middle of that crescendo, you've kind of got to the very last little split second of that note before the breath has really got to project so that your crescendo is carrying on in that gap. And it's a real technique that when students get it, it's just, oh my God, yeah, that phrase then works. And it's just, it's black or white. It's either working or not. So I think someone like Christian Limburg just absolutely mastered the musicality of the trombone and making the breath just like you say, seamless, just not even appear in the music.
mm.
But yeah, moving on to the breath and breathing, I think, well, actually, talking about my illness, which you mentioned earlier, um, some of the top oncologists in Europe have actually said that playing the trombone has probably contributed to saving my life and the breathing involved with it. So yeah, I owe my life to the trombone.
Isn't that
Off the bat.
interesting? It's you know, we talk about, and we'll talk about the journey that you've had, you know, which is extraordinary in itself. But isn't that interesting? You know, we talk about keeping music in our schools and in our communities and so on, and how it creates all manner of positive things, and those are all important things. But for you to say what you've just said, you know, possibly it has saved your life is quite profound. I mean, that is quite an amazing thing.
Yeah, yeah. I still like thank my lucky stars every single day. And yeah, my trombone's my best friend, really. Um, if top specialists in Europe have told me that actually that's most probably contributed to saving a life, then well, I'm not going to put it down anytime soon.
Absolutely. And do you think, though, that your illness, which, you know, has lasted a long time, you know, 9 years of navigating through, you know, lots of experiments, lots of new treatments and medicines, and many of them did not work for you, but you just kept pushing and persevering. But do you think your illness has made you or changed your playing as a trombonist, and indeed change your whole outlook as regards to how you deal with your business moving forward and so on?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Um, I don't think there's any sort of cancer fighter, cancer survivor who would reply no to that kind of question. I think my whole perspectives of life are completely and utterly different. I speak to my mum about it, and she says my personality is completely and utterly different. She
Hmm.
said, before I was so stubborn, I would be able to argue that black was white and I would win.
Yeah.
I was very stubborn, and that's I think being stubborn throughout the fight was very useful, but I didn't think I was going to be strong enough. I really didn't
Mm.
at the start. Um, but I think that inner stubbornness did come out, and determination. I think there was an awful lot of denial as well while I was going through it, because every single treatment failed,
Mm.
um, up until the final clinical trial drug that got me to remission. And for 5 years, constantly, every result, my specialists kept saying, "You are not going to survive."
Hmm.
Um, they kept telling me, "We've run out of options," but then they found something else. And then that failed and said, Carol, we can't control this. And
Mm.
they sent me to psycho-oncologists to help me get my head around the fact that I was dying. But I was still touring and I still felt okay. So I was like, well, I don't understand what's going on. And my specialist in one appointment said, Carol, there's a 4 centimeter tumor between your lungs. I said, 4 centimeters. And I sort of put my thumb and finger together to sort of
Mm.
try and pretend sort of 4 centimeters in the air, looked at him and said, that's pathetic. 4 centimeters. And he just said, Carol, it's 4 centimeters that is slowly killing you, and we can't stop it. And I think that was the first time it sort of hit home. And even so, I was sort of in denial. I think just to be able to, I thought I went to hospital, let them do what they needed to me, like test on me, whatever they needed to do. And as
Mm.
soon as I closed the door in the hospital and I left, I was like, right, back to me again. Because I think if you let it just weigh down your shoulders, and it's
Mm.
so easy to do that, there's just no escape from it. And my music was always my escape. When you go on stage, you get so caught up in what you're doing, so focused and just all in the moment of the music, that was my escape. And I
Mm.
tell people now, I've had so many people ask for advice of how they can help their mother, their friend who's going through a cancer battle. And I just say, just find an escape, even if it's like 2 hours watching a movie. You can escape the worries just for 2 hours, and that
Mm.
really, really will help you. Just
Mm.
give yourself a break from it because it can be so all encompassing.
I mean, it seems to me that, as a musician, there's always this feeling of stress release, when you perform or if you're on stage. And, there's a certain amount of nerves there. There's the adrenaline going on. And as you say, you escape. There are so many other things to consider. So even if you go on stage with severe toothache or something, or a really bad cold, as soon as you start playing, it just seems to all have disappeared, and then it comes back again as soon as you leave the stage. You think, oh, my tooth. But obviously your situation is much, much more serious. But were you able to talk to people, your fellow colleagues, working colleagues, about your situation?
Yes, absolutely. And I think I really, really am so thankful that people kept employing me as well. There were some people that didn't keep employing me. It was quite crazy at the time because I was soon out of graduating, so I was still up in Manchester at the time, and the local people there were not employing me, but people like the BBC National Orchestra of Wales down in Cardiff were employing me still and supporting me. Um, and so it was crazy that I had to get so tired traveling all that way just to be able to earn a living. But I was just so thankful to the people that did carry on supporting me. And um, I mean, the trombone world is quite small, and we all know each other all across the world. And I think I had just so much support. Um, I mean, silly little things like I remember doing the sort of what we call muddy field dates, the concerts, big firework display concerts, and I remember you always have got clothes pegs keeping your music on the stand, and I remember a colleague of mine ended up grabbing lots of pegs and sticking them all on me at one point. Just silly little things. But then fast forward a few years, and I was in having my first stem cell transplant, and this clothes peg joke just carried on throughout the years. They just turned up in places, and then the BBC last night of the proms, the trombone section all had a clothes peg on their trombone, and I
Oh,
was stuck in hospital watching it, and I was just like, oh, that's
how
just incredible. But
incredible.
it's just small little things like that that just mean the absolute world, and you've got that support all over the place. So yeah, welling up now.
Absolutely, I am too. It's an extraordinary gesture and story, and something, as you say, it starts with a little bit of fun, but means an incredible amount. So thank you for sharing that for sure. And I mean, the trombone, world seems to be really close knit, and obviously that was, a key factor to you feeling supported as a musician during your illness. And as you navigated through that, I mean, did you find that there might have also been a sense of almost fragility in that, we know that there's always people lining up to take your place, as it were. Did you feel a slight responsibility that you had to work, you had to keep going, or was that just simply a necessary thing that you felt you wanted to do as opposed to needed to do?
Yeah, it's a funny one, that one, because I think I didn't really consider people taking my place. I didn't ever think about that. I think what was going on in my mind was because my specialists, I think it was after my first initial chemotherapy, I'd lost my hair for the first time. It was 6 months long. And then I think I was in my 20s, and it's quite a common cancer, Hodgkin's lymphoma, in your 20s and 30s and 50s to 60s.
Mm.
Um, and the prognosis is really good for the primary treatment. And because that failed, I mean, the chances of it failing are really, really slim, but I was one of those people. And then my prognosis suddenly started taking sort of a skydiving route. And I remember having a really tight hug from my chemotherapy nurse. And she said, "I'm just so sorry." I said, "It's okay, it's fine. We've got more options." But I didn't realize that my prognosis was now starting to really get bad straight after the first treatment. And I went through so many other treatments after that. I exhausted all chemotherapy, all radiotherapy, stem cell transplants. I exhausted so many avenues. But I think it was actually my specialists repeatedly telling me that I wasn't going to make it. That kind of, they kept telling me that I wasn't getting my head around that, but I think I was, sort of subconsciously. And I think I was just living my life as best I could in whatever time I had left. And I was just trying to do as much as I could. I was traveling around the world touring. I was doing all sorts of amazing tours, amazing recording sessions, and just loved every moment of it. And that's all I was focusing on, and just enjoying myself. And I wasn't really thinking about the big picture of, I don't know, someone might take my place if I'm not well enough for this bit. I didn't even have time to think that. I think I was just trying to live as much as I could.
Yeah, and I mean the whole process of being a musician, especially one like yourself who's touring and all of what that entails, it's quite physical. I mean, you're constantly packing things up and unpacking and moving around and queuing up and always on the go, and that's before even the playing starts. And you do wonder whether this whole combination where the body is physically active and your mind is active, and as you say, you're totally focused on something else, whether this was such a powerful scenario for your well-being, and ultimately the goal in getting over such a devastating situation, really.
Yeah, I think the touring and like you say, everything that comes with it just took my mind off it all. It
Mm.
absolutely did. I mean, on tour with Seal, I toured with Seal for 6 years, and initially I was allowed to book the horn section, and luckily some of my very, very closest best friends came on tour with me. And so touring the world with your best friends, it doesn't get better than that.
Incredible.
And we had such amazing times, and I think I also need to thank all of them for getting me through it. And there were even times post bone marrow transplant, right at the very end, when I was trying to get back on my feet again, and I was still touring with Seal, and he kept employing me, which was amazing. And there was an American tour, and I was like, this is the first American tour, the whole of America, from East Coast right across on tour bus across the West Coast on Route 66. I've got to do this. I've got to do this tour. And I was only about 8 or 9 months through my bone marrow transplant. And normally you're not allowed to travel abroad for the first year at least. And in my case, with a donor bone marrow transplant, your blood type has got to change over to your donor's type. So initially I was O negative, and my bone marrow donor was A positive. And normally it takes just a few months for your blood types to change over. But mine, for some reason, didn't change over for 2.5 years.
Oh.
So in that time, I couldn't produce my own red blood cells. I couldn't produce any blood. So I had to keep going back to hospital every 2 weeks for 2.5 years to have blood transfusions, just topping me up. And throughout all that time, they were really confused why it wasn't changing. They tried all sorts of things, including chemotherapy of all things, just to try and get it to change over. And so we started this American tour, and it's like, how am I going to do it? There's no way I can do this tour on just one topping up of blood. And so Seal said, look, I'll just fly you home whenever you need. On a day off, I'll fly home. We'll bring someone else out if need be to cover you for a couple of gigs, and then you can fly back out again. Oh my God. And he did that. So I remember we sort of started East Coast, all the way down the East Coast, got as far as Chicago, and that was it. My blood count went down to about 6, and I was struggling to walk upstairs and everything. The oxygen that's needed to go around your body to move, I couldn't get my breath. I couldn't do anything. So I flew back home again. They got someone else out for 2 gigs, I think it was. I got topped up with blood. They topped me up as high as they could, and flew me back out again. And it was just amazing that I've had people support me like that throughout my illness, when they could have easily just got someone else.
Isn't that extraordinary? And all credit to Seal and his team, you know, for yeah, well, just being incredibly supportive. I mean, it's beyond supportive. It's just fantastic that spirit exists, really. So amazing. And do you think that, you know, this whole experience has changed you as a musician? Do you feel any difference in the sound that you create through your trombone, or how you're navigating through the choices that you make professionally?
Yeah, very interesting you say that. I personally haven't really noticed if it's changed me as a player, but I think pretty much everyone that's heard me play say it has. And I find that really interesting. People are saying that there's a lot more emotion coming out now, which kind of makes sense, I guess. And something I've sort of put together, probably it was all since I got through everything, and I decided I wanted to sort of emulate the likes of Dick Nash, Urbie Green, all these great trombonists with the sort of the really high register of the trombone, playing these beautiful ballads. And I wanted to sort of emulate that kind of thing. I put together a load of music, arranged everything for string quartet and rhythm section, and started recording these ballads. And I think that kind of really shows a part of the trombone that's not heard very often. Very, very high register, slide vibrato, and beautifully quiet, and hearing that real pure tone that the trombone can produce. And I think that's when people have said, now this is different. This is a different carol coming out now. This is different emotions. This is deep, deep feeling that's coming out, that's coming straight from the heart. And I think even when I'm teaching now, it's changed the way I teach. It's very often when you're studying and learning a piece of music, you just concentrate on playing the right notes in the right order, in the right time. But that's not what music is. Music is to evoke emotions. It's to paint a picture. It's to make people move. You've got to move people with what you're doing. Those notes are just a reference. You've got to pull on something within you to actually make that piece of music say something. And I think that's something that I've subconsciously, again, been able to do a lot more since what I've been through. And then in terms of decisions of my career, and if it's changed that, I think it's funny because when I got through the bone marrow transplant, and then the really, really long road to recovery. Like I said, it was like 2.5 years before my blood type changed. My DNA changed as well to my donor's type. And that sort of long road to recovery was just so slow. I mean, the cancer was gone, but I was like, I'm just really struggling. And I actually went into a really dark place mentally in that time. Probably about 18 months of really, really dark times. And it was funny because my specialists then sent me to a psycho-oncologist again. The same psycho-oncologist I saw to get my head around the fact that I was dying a few years back. I was now seeing this psychologist to try and reverse that and try and not be afraid of the future. And I was just so daunted by it. I think I was living with this sort of brick wall ahead of me, getting quite close, but not quite getting to it. And now suddenly that brick wall's gone. And I felt like I was just thrown out into outer space. And it was just so daunting to me that I suddenly had a life ahead of me. And it might sound so strange to someone who's not been through something like this, but I just couldn't see how to put one foot in front of the other. I really didn't know. I suddenly was questioning, who am I? Who do I want to play the trombone? Where do I want to live? Should I live here? It's like, do I want to do music? Who am I? I just had no idea, because I think at one point cancer sort of dictated who I was for a third of my life at one point. So it was that safety net of hospital appointments was just gone, and it was just so strange. And it was funny how I remember I had the decision whether to go for the bone marrow transplant or not. I got to remission through this experimental drug, got me to remission, and it shocked all the specialists. And they gave me a month to decide whether to go for the bone marrow transplant or not. And they said they found 2 matches out of 11 million people on the bone marrow register. One was pregnant, so they couldn't ask her because in that month time frame, she wasn't going to be able to do it. But thankfully, this German man said yes. He went through all the tests and he was a perfect match. And they said, so the remission from this drug, it might last for a long time. We don't know, because it's so experimental. We just guess that you probably live for about 3 years if you leave it like that. But a bone marrow transplant, replacing your immune system with a better immune system and start from scratch. If it works, you could live for ripe old age. If it doesn't work, you could die within the first week, couple of weeks, month. And they said the survival rate was about 30% for the bone marrow transplant. So this month to decide what to do was it was the toughest decision ever. And I remember asking my parents, my close friends, my brother, everyone, what would you do? And every single person said, I can't answer that.
No.
But we're behind you 100%, absolutely, whatever you choose. And it was just, oh my God. I so often going through cancer fighters can feel very alone, that this battle is theirs, it's just them. But I didn't really feel that going through the fight, because I had so many people around me, so much support. But actually at this moment, this decision, I felt so alone. And I surprised myself. I almost chose just to leave it like that and live for maybe 3 years. I went as far as almost choosing that. I went completely the whole spectrum in my decision making. And I remember saying to myself, I don't ever want any regrets. I mustn't ever regret whatever I choose. If I choose to live for 3 years, I don't want to regret having not given the bone marrow transplant a go, even in the last few days of those 3 years. If I go for the bone marrow transplant and they come in after a week or 2 and say, I'm so sorry, you've not got much time left, I don't want to regret having given it a go. And what I didn't realize was actually there was a third regret. And that came once I'd gone for the bone marrow transplant. It worked. I came out of hospital. I had a future ahead of me. And there was a regret there that I regretted going for the bone marrow transplant. And that was so strange. But I then, speaking to the psycho-oncologist, they said that's survivor's guilt. And it's a real thing. And I had no idea what that was at all. But then I was regretting having a life. So strange. So strange.
It is strange. And it's so fascinating that you're able to talk so openly about this, because it's so incredible what you're saying, and I'm sure this is helping so many people, you know, who might be going through a similar situation, not necessarily you know, musicians and touring the world and so on, but many different people, because you do imagine that, you know, once you've been given, let's say, the all clear in something, you think, oh, that's great, and your life will go back to normal again, and get going, and that's all wonderful. But actually, there's an awful lot still to navigate through, and it's very interesting what you're saying, that well, actually you felt guilty by having this opportunity to survive and to get going again, and really interesting.
Yeah, it's just such a difficult time, the bone marrow transplant, because I knew one person just ahead of me in the process, and she didn't survive, and also someone straight behind me in the process, and she also didn't survive, and she left behind a 7-year-old daughter, and that just added to my guilt. I just felt so bad for surviving. Really strange.
And I mean, you talk about it really eloquently, and is this something that you are putting in to a book form, making a publication out of this, so that, you know, we can, you know, because a lot of what you're saying, I feel anyway right now, I just need time to digest this, you know, time to feel it, time to just think, well, wow, what would you do, you know, in a situation like this? And of course you can never answer it until you're in that situation. But do you think it might be helpful actually putting this into a publication?
You know, you're one of thousands and thousands of people have said that to me now. I did start a little online sort of blog thing while I was going through the bone marrow transplant, just that my mum could update, I could update throughout the bone marrow transplant procedure. Just all about blood counts and all sorts of things, and all the medical procedures that were going on. And ultimately I thought, well, my mum can announce my death on here, and hopefully she won't have to just constantly tell so many people. But it ended up being a bit of a place for me to write a few entries once I got through it all. And I probably continued to update it a little bit for a few years afterwards. And the amount of comments on there, I've had 50,000 people tell me I need to write a book now. And I have started, it's very difficult, very difficult. I started writing it and I just burst into tears. So yeah, it's a difficult process, but I really do want to do it, even though medical advances are just way beyond where I was at now. But for instance, the drug that got me to remission was the first drug in over 40 years to be FDA approved for Hodgkin's lymphoma. So, and that was in production for about 15 years. So it's crazy that the statistics that were around, and I managed to land right in that little perfect little spot to have benefited from it. And actually that drug was going to be removed from the Cancer Drugs Fund because it's so expensive. But I went to the Houses of Parliament and campaigned to members of Parliament to keep that drug on the Cancer Drugs Fund, and luckily it stayed. And so it's now positioned in the primary treatment for Hodgkin's lymphoma, which didn't work for me, but if I'd had that drug in the mix, I probably would have got to remission much quicker.
Interesting. And now that, you know, the UK is making incredible strides with the COVID vaccination, I mean, this must be an incredibly important time, poignant time in your particular situation.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've been shielding the whole time. People like me have had to shield since last March, just because if I were to catch it, it'd be, yeah, probably not good ending. Since all my treatments and all the poisons I went through, because the chemotherapies are so poisonous to the body, I've been left not being able to produce my own antibodies in my blood. So I have to infuse my own immunoglobulins once a week. A little bottle contains about 2,000 people from blood donations. And so that tops up my antibody level. So I have to do that every single week. But I've just been told just a couple of days ago from my immunologist that the vaccine I'm not going to have any antibody response from the vaccine. And there'll be millions and millions of people in my position that won't respond very well to the vaccine. But I might be able to hope for some T-cell response. I don't quite understand the science behind that, but hopefully I might have a tiny bit of response. But I've now had both vaccines, and just actually put a post on social media the other day saying, if people are out there thinking, no, I'm not going to have the vaccine, I don't agree with having injections, I'm going to do, I don't know, eat herbs instead or something like that. I don't know. But if people believing the conspiracy theories of the fact there's going to be tracing your DNA before this, all these crazy stories that are coming out there, and people don't want to be a pincushion or they're afraid of needles, you've just got to put that aside, because the more people get vaccinated, I've been told, I have to rely on the whole population getting their 2 jabs and herd immunity to keep me safe. And there's going to be millions and millions of people out there that need everyone else to get vaccinated to keep them safe. So it's not a case of being selfish now. It's a case of thinking of everyone else, not just your friends and family, but people you walk past, people you end up in an office with, or people people you travel with on the train. You're looking after everyone else.
Indeed, yes, it's such an important message for sure, and really appreciate you mentioning that. And gosh, yes, it's the one probably situation that we'll all experience whereby we can all make a difference to each other. It's as simple as that. And when you consider the journey that you've gone through, lasting many years, that 5 minutes getting a vaccine for COVID is absolutely, a tiny drop in the whole scene, really, and as far as helping each other. So, and I mean, because your story, and I don't really like to use that word story, but the uniqueness of your journey, and it's still continuing, really, because psychologically there must be an awful lot to still grapple with, to negotiate, to chat with yourself about, and so on. But because you do inspire a lot of other musicians, what is the best piece of advice, or the most important piece of advice you would give to a young player?
Oh, okay. I'll have to think about this one.
That's in a way unique to you, considering everything that you've had to balance through the darkest of times. What became important for you in your unique journey? So, for example, in my case, I find, or the bit of advice that I feel I seem to be fairly consistent with, is listen to yourself. Listen to yourself, because everything has to start from within in order to truly express itself externally, and so that for me is key, and I keep giving myself that advice. Right, Evelyn, what do you want to do? What are you listening to? What are you feeling? What is happening here? So it's not a selfish situation. It's quite simply, well, you've got to make that decision yourself before you can then, act externally.
Yeah, I think I think I'd probably say a combination of probably be creative, never stop being creative, and be versatile. Because I
Mm,
think my versatility has enabled me to continue making a living um, at times when I wouldn't have been able to. I think,
mm,
like, for instance, I got home from my bone marrow transplant, um, finally got out of my isolated room that I was in there for 6 weeks, and I got home. I could, I could hardly walk. I couldn't even keep food down. Um, Everything I was learning to do all over again, and a brand new immune system. And I mean, I caught pneumonia, the flu countless times over the next few years while I was getting all my childhood vaccines all over again. Um, but I remember getting home, and it was in the first few days I got home, and a recording session came in um, to sing on a TV advert, and I was like, yeah, I can probably do that.
mm.
I was like, I can't, I can just sit there and do it, got all the gear, and I just had to pretend to be Doris Day for for a TV advert, and I was like, yeah, I can do that. And I wasn't anywhere near strong enough for picking up a trombone, let alone blowing a trombone. But I got a recording session in to sing, and I've never really been much of a singer, but when I've been asked to sing or being a backing vocalist or actually duetting with Seal at one point, I've just had to practice a bit and really work at it. I've never had a lesson, but I've got a musician's ear, so I've just worked hard and practiced when I've had these things come in. And I did this TV advert, and honestly, that was my first escape again from
Mm.
all the burdens of what I'd just been through, and I was able to just do a few takes of pretending to be Doris Day for the Flash TV advert for a cleaning product.
Well, I think you're probably extremely modest because you know, backing singers are amazing. You know, it's not a it's an incredibly skillful thing to do. So I think you're probably being extremely modest about all of that. But you know, at the end of the day, it's saying yes to these things, you know, and as you mentioned, well, then work at it. You know, it has to be practiced. It has to be nurtured, and giving yourself that opportunity to try to do it as best as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always said yes to everything. Um, I think now I'm getting a bit older and and wiser. There are times where when I can say no now. But I mean, in the early days when you're starting to freelance, I remember a call at when was it? 4:30 p.m. one afternoon, and I was still in Manchester, and I got a call from the Halle Orchestra, and they said, we've got a concert in Lincoln Cathedral, starts at 7 o'clock. It's a 3 hour drive. Can you get here? It's like, okay, that's not 3 hours. You've not given me 3 hours notice. So they just get here as soon as you can. And I thought, yeah, I'll say yes. And you kind of don't ask any questions at that age. You say,
Mm.
yes, I can do it. I'll be there. And before sat navs, and it was just trying to navigate with a map on the passenger seat. I was getting changed while I was driving, and I had a little old Mini at the time, and I remember managing to get all my clothes off and had my concert wear on the back seat, and I was just getting the concert wear over to the passenger seat, and I got to a toll booth, and and I had to wind down my window and pay this toll booth, and I was just in my underwear. Crazy stories. And I paid this guy, and he was like, "What?"
Yeah, yeah. Try not to look.
I know. And then I was getting my clothes on, and I was ringing the principal trombone player saying, "Look, it's going to be really, really cutting it fine. I've been breaking all the speed limits to get there. If I get there on time, I mean, I don't know if I'm going to make it there before the downbeat." And he said, "Don't worry, we're ready to change the order of the program if we don't make it in time." All right, okay. The whole Halle Orchestra waiting for me
Yes.
to get there. Okay. Anyway, I got to Lincolnshire, and the cathedral. I got to the outskirts. I was like, how do I find the cathedral?
Oh,
And it was 7 o'clock on the dot. The concert starts at 7 o'clock, and the bells started tolling from the cathedral. So I wind down my windows, like, okay, where's that coming from? Okay, follow the sound of the bells. And I was following the sound of the cathedral bells, thinking the concert's going to start as soon as these 7 bells have finished. But 7 bells to get there. I pulled up behind the conductor's car. 2 people rushed me in. There was a round of applause, and I had no idea why, as I was getting my trombone out the case and trying to get on the back of the stage quickly. And it was the conductor just taking his bow. And I managed to sit down just as the conductor turned round to look at the orchestra. And it was literally that fine, getting there, heart going like mad and
Oh,
out of breath. And the conductor just looked to check I was there and then said, right, downbeat was Scheherazade and
oh,
big second trombone solo. It's like, oh my God,
oh my goodness.
really?
That's an incredible story, actually.
But yeah,
And no warm-ups or anything.
no, not at all. But there's so many instances where I said yes, and then you just work out how to do it afterwards. Some recording sessions have come in when I've just had this one trombone with me without the B flat and F trigger extension bit, and I've had recording sessions when I've been away from home, saying we've just got to record 1 note for this Sony TV advert. Okay, no problem, great, send it through. And I get to my hotel room and I've got my recording gear with me, and the 1 note is a bottom D, and the lowest note on this trombone is a bottom E.
Oh no, gosh.
I've said yes to this now. How am I going to do this? I can't just fake the note because that just sounds.
Yes.
So I just recorded a load of bottom E's and then just adjusted them all in Logic and put them down and sent it off, and no one had a clue. So
And
it all worked.
that was that. I mean, I suppose it's interesting because maybe the bit of advice that you can certainly give to young people is self-sufficiency. You know, you're very self-sufficient. You are able to just kind of navigate through the situations.
Yeah, I think another bit of advice is probably try and find out a little bit more before you say yes as well, because I have almost come unstuck a few times, but there's always a way around it. Always a way around it.
Yeah, yeah. And do you think, you know, just finishing off here, because I'm very conscious of how generous you've been with your time, but you know, I know that there are, and you have been president of the British Trombone Society. You have been vice president-elect of the International Trombone Association and president of the Trombone Festival. And I mean, all of these specialized organizations, and it's the same with percussion, of course, and indeed most instruments. But, you know, do you feel that the trombone is an instrument that will definitely be developed in the future, whether it's the trombone itself structurally, whether it's the compositions written for it, and indeed the playing techniques? I mean, where do you see the trombone in the future?
Oh, that's an amazing question. I mean, it's developing all the time. There's new models, new ideas coming out from all the manufacturers. At the International Trombone Festival every summer, we have every single manufacturer there. And it's enormous, the amount of things that are available to try hands-on. And we did some live streams not last summer, because obviously there wasn't a festival, but the one before. And I walked around all the manufacturers and interviewed lots of them to see what kind of things they had available. And there's so much new tech coming out all the time. Unbelievable sort of ideas from trombonists to manufacturers. So they're always creating new models, new ways of playing the trombone, and then pieces are being written for those new techniques and new bits of instrument. And I think it's fascinating just attending one of those festivals to be able to just walk around just that hall. You don't need to go and see any concerts and recitals, but obviously they're available as well of the top players in the world. But just walking around and learning all about all of that and all the sheet music and everything's there. And I think the trombone is just gonna, there's going to be more and more better players out there, and it's just going to get, I think it's going to get more and more competitive. But I think the more versatile the instrument becomes, I mean, I'm recording a new album now, which is all pop and electronic. I just want to try and do something a little bit different again. And the kind of genres that we can play in, I think it's just going to be, everyone's got to be so much more versatile to make a living. And I think it's going to be really interesting seeing the kind of top soloists that turn up in the future, because there's lots of classical ones, there's lots of jazz ones, but I think there's going to be some people that really cross over as well. So
And I think that, really absolutely, and I think that's definitely your uniqueness is that you're just all embracing, and you have this wonderful way of, in a way, using technology as an extension of what the raw hand can do, of what the human body can do through their actual instrument, and it's such a wonderful thing, because the creativity is then absolutely, you know, endless. It's just an open field. Carol, I've just really enjoyed this time with you, and appreciate so much of what you've said. It's inspiring on so many levels, you know, from one musician to another musician, and just you know, seeing how you have created a really unique musical journey. And so whether you've been in the profession a long time, like myself, or, you know, you're a student there with wide eyes and so on, it's equally inspiring, but also for sharing so candidly the extraordinary journey you have had with your illness, and, you know, talking about how that's really affected so many aspects of your life, and how helpful you know, talking about it is to other people. So I really want to thank you for that as well. But there's so many things I'd love to ask you, and maybe we can do that over a coffee at some point. You know,
I'd love that.
Free to move. But in any case, I wish you all the very, very best with all the projects that you're coming up, especially with this new one with the trombone and electronics and all sorts of things. We'll keep a good eye on that, and so all the best with that and everything else that you're doing. And maybe one day we can do something for trombone and percussion.
I was, you know what, I was actually thinking that this morning, so I would absolutely love that.
Yep, indeed. Well, there is already a double concerto for trombone and percussion that Christian Lindberg has written, called Liverpool Lullabies, can you believe?
Oh.
And very, very lovely piece, actually, really effective piece. And of course, he's an extraordinary composer like you. And so certainly, you know, I'm sure there's lots of things that we can conjure up. But
I think that's a brilliant idea.
All right,
Thank you
Carol.
so much. It's been an honor. Thank you.